Today, no one knows who killed Michael Francke, and from what I've been able to find out, the police don't have any really good clues.
If it was a random act of violence, so be it. I'm not trying to make my brother out a martyr. I just want to find out who killed him.
I believe the motive was the fact that there were individuals that were going to be exposed in an operation that they did not want exposed.
What makes this case special is that a government official, a high government official, was murdered on his way home from work outside his office one night. And we have to know who did it and why.
Who killed Oregon Corrections Chief Michael Francke? Explore the mystery next on Town Hall.
And now, your moderator, Jack Faust.
Hi. It's been 8 months since Michael Francke was killed on a dark winter night in Oregon, and 8 months later, we don't have the answers to the questions posed by this program. Who killed him and why? It's a story that has fascinated Oregonians and I think people in the Northwest. It has lots of the elements of old-fashioned melodrama, murder, mystery, intrigue, hints of corruption in high place, and a dogged reporter. I'd like to start off by having us meet that dogged reporter. I think it's safe to say, I'll say it to our viewers, that there probably wouldn't be much of a Michael Francke story if it weren't for Phil Stanford of the Oregonian. Phil, there's an old saying, it's better to light one candle than curse the darkness, and you've done both. You've cursed the darkness, and by my count, 29 candles. You've written 29 columns on this. That's about 23,000 words. That's a small book. Why?
Well, first of all, I'm not the only one working on this in the press.
No, but I think we're going to have to, I think they'll agree too. You're the lead player.
Well, it's first of all because I cared about what the Francke brothers were doing. Their concern was obvious, and I hope I would do something like that and do it as well for a member of my family if that happened. But beyond that, and more importantly, I think, is that there's a professional responsibility. This is the stuff that we have newspapers for and TV stations, and I'm one of the people in the room who's been pursuing it.
What is the professional responsibility, though, Phil, that takes it away from other unsolved murders? There have been lots of them.
Well, we have a responsibility to public officials. We always think about the responsibility public officials have to the people whom they serve, but this was a man who was holding a high position in government here in Oregon. He was murdered on his way home from work, right outside his office, and there's at least a reasonable chance, based on things he'd said to the family before, that it had something to do with his job.
So it's the person. We had an important man here, and a man who's involved at high levels, and he's gone and no one knows why.
Right, and it has something to do with the integrity of the institutions of the state.
That's a good answer. Would you two introduce yourselves, please? You first.
Kevin Francke.
Pat Francke?
And you are the brothers of Mike Francke, is that correct?
That's correct.
Another element of this story, I think that's fascinating to the public, is your devotion to the cause. You're both busy men, you both have jobs, you both have families, and yet you've made this a crusade. Same question, why?
You would do the same thing if your brother was murdered, and the circumstances were so unusual.
What was it about the circumstances that drives you, really?
From the very beginning when we came up here and found out that he'd laid in that doorway for so long, and that they'd found his car sitting outside with the door standing open and no sign of him, and hadn't called the police, just didn't make any sense.
It stank from the get-go. Getting different stories from different individuals about where they were, what time, what they were doing, what they accomplished during what time frame. And it got worse. It didn't get better.
The smell got worse?
Yeah.
What stunk at the beginning? What first triggered your feeling that you say it stank was your word?
Well, the fact that you've got basically an individual who you might refer to as the head of a corporation, if you look at corrections as a corporation. If you walk outside and you find his car door open, that he was beeped numerous times and he never responded to the beepers, that would cause an alarm for me if I were in that same situation. The car door standing open, late at night, dark, something wrong.
Let's take our viewers back. We have a video clip prepared to update our viewers. Kevin Baird giving you the details again, a rundown, a summary of the event. If we could have that, please.
If you were trying to solve the mystery of Michael Francke's murder, the obvious place to begin is the crime scene. The morning of January 18th, Francke's body was found near his office. Lawmen say he staggered from the parking lot after being stabbed in the heart.
The murder weapon was a knife about this big. Authorities are not saying if it's been found yet. Possible suspect was seen running in that direction. Another man was seen inside corrections headquarters, a mysterious person authorities have still not identified. But before we go any further, your investigation might turn to the victim. What sort of person was Michael Francke? Why would he end up murdered?
Francke, you would find out, made a name for himself reforming New Mexico's troubled prison system following a bloody riot in which 33 people were killed. After being appointed Oregon Corrections Director, he made friends with Representative Mike Burton.
He's the kind of person who would probably easily make friends and easily make enemies. He's the kind of person who you had to notice.
You would contact family members. They would say that Francke had uncovered evidence of organized crime within the prison and wanted new blood in management. We talked to his brother in Florida via satellite.
I believe that Mike was setting about, as he told me, that he was going to do a general house cleaning, overall house cleaning. One of the individuals that he didn't name by name but stated as his deputy was going to go, and several other key people in the organization.
Kevin Francke is trying to solve this case from the outside, analyzing circumstantial evidence and pursuing his own line of inquiry. He's especially interested in what people like Mike Burton have to say. Burton talked with Michael Francke about alleged corruption.
He said to me once, the easiest place to get drugs in Oregon is inside the state penitentiary. You've got corrections officers who are generally undertrained, probably underpaid, underloved, and the opportunity to fall into part of that process is probably very great. And he indicated to me that there was, in his sense, a lot of that going on, and they were going to start doing some shakedown.
Now consider the possible motives. Was Michael Francke killed by a professional hitman because he was about to blow the whistle on wrongdoing? Was a former inmate trying to get even with Francke for cleaning up New Mexico's prison system? Was it a robbery, even though valuables were found on his body? Or was it his personal life?
The two primary motives, I think, have stayed the same, and that is either random street violence, robbery, or theft, or the fact that he was the Corrections Division chief and either revenge or something related to his position.
There's a man, that's Dale Penn, the Marion County District Attorney. I think it's interesting the way Kevin Baird framed that, what you do if you were investigating this. And Dale Penn, of course, is the man in charge of investigating it. I think he's the man who a lot of you would like to have some questions for as to what he is doing. But he's not on Town Hall tonight. He was invited and he's declined. And we do have a tape of Dale Penn explaining why he's not here in Town Hall tonight.
And I don't think it's appropriate for the prosecutor or someone from the investigation to appear on this program, is that there are two legal proceedings ongoing right now that really are concerned with the precise issues that this town hall program wanted to discuss. One of them is the fact that there's a lawsuit pending about the release of the autopsy results. The parties on both sides have been requested to attend. I will be a witness in a hearing October 6th, and several other people who've been invited to attend the town hall meeting will also be witnesses. And we believe, I certainly believe, that it's most appropriate at this stage to have that matter discussed and decided in the courtroom rather than on a television show. That's one reason. But probably the more important reason is that there is the grand jury that is meeting, given the responsibility. That grand jury has the responsibility to make the decisions that really are the issue for town hall. Who killed Michael Francke? And I don't want anyone to be able to later attack the grand jury on the basis that in some way we've attempted to manipulate publicity about this case or attempted to shape the grand jury in any way.
Kevin Francke, Pat Francke, what do you think of that?
I think it was, it speaks for itself, doesn't it?
Pat?
Mr. Penn isn't here. I can understand his legal standing on not being here because of the lawsuit. We've offered to try and settle a thing out of court. We've given him assurances. My mother has promised him. I don't know if our lawyer has said anything to him formally, but we've assured him that we are not going to share this report with anybody. It would all be hand-delivered, no Xerox copies, no nothing. We just want to know, for our own peace of mind, what went on that night.
Well, I will say that Dale Penn, irrespective of what you may think of his reasons, is in fairly distinguished company in declining the invitation to be on Town Hall tonight. Quite a few others from the state in high place with responsibility here were asked. If we could have a font here now, it would show us. These are the people who were invited to appear and have declined the governor. Fred Pierce, the corrections chief, Dale Penn, as you just heard, Larry Lumen, who's the state medical examiner, conducted the autopsy here, Major Dean Renfro from the Oregon State Police, and Judge John Warden, who is the special inquiry director into this matter. All asked, all have said no. So let's go back to our, I'm going to call you the expert, Phil Stanford, whether you like it or not. I see you shuddering a little at that. Let's take our viewers through the events of January 17th. And what we have here are some graphics, Phil, and I'd like to ask you to take our viewers through these graphics if we could. You can see here.
Okay, the X is the Dome building, of course.
And what is the Dome building?
Headquarters for the Corrections Department in Salem.
Why don't we just tell for our viewers who the Corrections Department is in charge of?
Oregon prisons.
All the Oregon prisons.
System.
All right. Okay. All of them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, well, the building faces those circular roads out there. That's also called the parking lot. And Michael Francke's car was parked in where the two circles come together. Not where the X is, but where the two circles come together. Closer towards the building. His body was found on a porch, which you can't see since we're looking at it from the top. It would be on the right-hand side of the building, the left-hand side as you face it.
This was 7 o'clock. Of course, in January it was dark
Right.
at that time. All right? You could
It's
have
been reported that he was stabbed at 7 o'clock, and it is reported that he was stabbed 15 feet from the car. But we've been out there 3 times this week and kind of walked things off, and I don't understand how they come up with their numbers. The only way they're able to pinpoint the time of death is that one of his directors and her secretary were leaving the building, what, about 7:15 when they found his car standing open?
Well, they can't pinpoint it, is the whole point. There is no, quote, eyewitness. They can only guesstimate, and the guesstimate is 7 to 7:05. It could have been 6:30, it could have been 6:45. There's a lot of errors in the time frame. A lot of things could have happened. A lot of people could have done a lot of things in that time
That's the key, as you say, a
period.
lot of things could have happened.
Exactly.
And that's what concerns you. You're not just concerned about timing, you're concerned about what happened
Precisely.
in that time. Gotcha. Next, if we could have the next graphic here. Phil?
Okay, that's the hospital across the street, about 100 yards from the Dome building. From a point not where the arrow begins, but closer to the Dome building, a person was seen running by this witness, 7 o'clock. We don't know. I mean, the police assume that what the guy saw was the murder taking place. I'm not convinced of that myself, and a number of other people aren't. But someone ran from that circular parking lot in that general direction.
All right, the next one, please. Now, hours later. We're now in the early hours of the morning.
And about where that dot is, that little porch on the left-hand side of the Dome building, as you look at it, is where the body was found at 12:45 a.m. by a security guard on his rounds after a search, which is one of the more interesting aspects of this case.
Next. Why is that one of the more interesting aspects of the case?
Two of his
Pat, you're laying forward on that.
2 of his deputies came out there. 2 of his top people were summoned. They were beeped. They came to the Dome building because these women were concerned they had found the director's car standing open and no sign of him. They kind of called around outside, went inside, and did a cursory search, looked at his office, in his office area for him, said he's not here. So they called these other 2 gentlemen in. These 2 fellas came, what, 8?
They notified security also.
Right. And they, as one of them told me, conducted a meticulous search of the building upstairs and down, looked in all the bathrooms, checked all the offices in the entire building, and found no sign of him. So they locked his car and they went home.
Locked his car and went home.
Yeah, left a note on the windshield.
Call me if you show up.
Now, they had called him at 2 restaurants that they knew he liked to eat at. They had tried him at home, and they had rung his pager, beeped him 2 times. And this, he had a pager very similar to this on his body when they found him.
And
He
nobody
was
thought
meticulous about answering that pager.
And this, I would say, too, for our viewers, this is a man who's had constant death threats. Is that right?
Mike was very security conscious, absolutely. Yeah.
Carried a pistol, a revolver in his car.
Sometimes.
All right, let's have the next slide, please. The final slide.
That's it.
That's it. All right, then we've done it. Okay, let me ask you something. I'll get back to you again for our viewers here. What kind of a guy was Mike Francke?
You don't have the time.
No, but just if you can run it down.
He was a complete human being. He enjoyed outdoors, he enjoyed sports. Mike had gone to undergraduate school on a full football scholarship, and he'd gone to law school, University of Virginia Law School, on a full legal scholarship. Room and board, the works, one of the most prestigious law schools in the country. He was offered a job in Mudge Rose, a very prestigious law firm in New York.
That's correct.
He declined
and
it because he didn't want to have to live in New York City. He loved New Mexico. He liked riding dirt bikes, loved riding his dirt bike, liked to be up in the mountains. And he loved things that made his mind work. He was the first civilian in the New Mexico prisons after the riot, after it was secured, and he wrote a definitive report on that was used as a guideline when he was asked 3.5 years later to take over corrections by his former boss, the Attorney General, then Governor Tony Anaya.
Pat, let me ask you this question. He was a big man. He was 6'3",
6'3",
over 200 pounds.
about 215.
Was he the
220.
kind of fellow who, if he came out and somebody was breaking into his car, he'd have given them a wrestle?
From what, yeah, I think he might have tried to grab him.
Because that's one of the theories, and that's one of the things to talk to now is the possibilities of the motive. You saw those raised by Kevin, and I'd like to throw these out. One of them, and one that the DA has expressed particular interest in, is robbery. Car robbery is a way of life here.
Mike's
Pat?
car was facing with the door away from the Dome building. The door that was open, the car was between him and the Dome building. Do you understand what I'm saying? It was parked head into a circular driveway, and to get to it, he had to walk around the back of the car and open the door. The attack, so we are told, occurred between the car and the Dome building. Are you going to tell me that a car prowler was surprised in the act of robbing the car and ran around the car and ran toward the Dome building? I don't think so. I think he's going to hot-foot it his quickest and easiest way out, which was across that circular drive and head toward those hospital buildings.
Any other thoughts on robbery? Robbery is a possibility here. Does anyone else have any thoughts on that? Would you identify yourself, please?
Eric Mason from Channel 6. So we've reported also on the fact that the car has been gone over quite thoroughly by the Oregon State Police, and just prior to us finding out about the grand jury meeting, they were also going over the car and its electronic alarm system. It had an electronic alarm, and according to sources inside the garage, they were looking into the fact that the system could have been tampered with in some way. We don't really know, I don't think, one way or another, if it had been tampered with, but it had a fairly elaborate alarm system, and if it had been going through by a car burglar, why didn't the alarm sound?
Mike was very strict with himself about keeping the car locked. He locked the car when it was in his own garage.
We're not persuaded on robbery, right? Heads shaking all. Let's take the next one, revenge. Again, death threats are part of his way of life. He's been in the corrections system. He's dealt with convicts, ex-cons. What about revenge? Somebody...
There's never in the history of corrections in the United States, I've talked to many directors and former directors, and they know of no instance at any time
Couldn't there be a
that
first?
the head of corrections has been killed. Yes, there could be a first, but the revenge motive is usually generated toward the individual who actually has the hands-on management of the institutions, and that would be, in this case, Dick Peterson. There could be a first. I don't think that, I think it's self-serving to look at the low probability scenarios and say, yeah, this could be a first, when there's so much more ample, compelling evidence and good reasons to have him killed than revenge.
Phil, what do you think about revenge?
It's one of the possibilities that I just sort of put in the back of my head. As Kevin said, it's probably a low probability cause, and I've been looking at others, actually. It still could turn out to be revenge.
Right there, would you identify yourself, please?
Patrick Henry, former San Francisco police officer and former Idaho State Penitentiary sergeant. I'm inclined to believe, Mr. Francke, that revenge is probably about the most absurd motive, due to the fact that he was the top of the ladder in corrections. Their personal contact with the inmate population is negligible at best. And even if
he's an administrator, isn't he?
Yes, he's an administrator.
He's not in the prison.
Even if he had shot down someone's parole or something like that, from a cop's viewpoint, and I'm sure that some of the people with the inmate organizations may tend to differ with me, but once that guy gets out of that joint, the last thing in the world he wants to do is to go butt heads or to mess around with anyone in the prison organization, let alone the head of it. They don't know the security that Mr. Francke had on the building. They are not, generally not, adept enough to even walk across there, let alone check the security system out. Revenge, no.
All right, revenge. Now, where's Jim Redden? Jim, would you identify yourself to our viewers?
Jim Redden with the Willamette Week newspaper.
And you have an article about 3 weeks ago on this. And this next motive is more delicate. But Jim, in your article, you said that Michael Francke had a reputation as a womanizer.
That's
and
correct.
listed as one of the possibilities, a jealous husband, a jealous boyfriend. Do you want to comment on that?
I've talked to people in both New Mexico and in Oregon that knew him. He was an unfaithful husband. I have not been told the names of any of his girlfriends, but anytime you're in a situation like that, I think you're always risking something from a jilted lover, a jilted lover's mate or former mate, or anything like that. So I don't think that's a possibility that can be completely overlooked.
What do we say to that? Brothers, you want to take that one? It's a delicate one.
We're still working on that lower percentage, that lower
Why do you
probability.
say it's lower percentage, though? Why do you say that? I mean, this is a kind of murder. You said before that the killing of a head of corrections is rare, but this is a kind of killing that isn't rare at all, this sort of killing. Why do you say that it's a low percentage? You want to talk about that, Kevin?
The occurrence here, again, I'm looking at the scenarios that can be created, that have been created, involving much, much greater risks of loss or risks of punishment. Caught dealing and distributing drugs, for instance. Not only do you lose your livelihood, you also might lose your freedom. That, to me, is worth killing for. I love my wife, but am I going to go out and kill somebody over my wife? It seems a little bit far-fetched if you're dealing with that. It does occur, it has occurred. Is someone going to come up to Mike, confront him, and murder him with a knife?
What do you say to that, Phil?
Well, I say they're all possibilities. You know, when you ask me about revenge, I say it's a possibility. I don't know who killed Michael Francke.
How's your feeling, though, about the jealousy? When you think about it, how do you feel about it as a possibility? How do you rate it?
Well, that's not my business. I mean, I'm not rating them. I'm exploring, you know, what I think is possible. And my position, or if I have a position on this thing from the beginning, is that the state was overlooking a connection, a possible connection, that is, to corruption in the system. They were doing everything they could to look the other way. I'm not saying these other things aren't possible. Could have been a car burglar, could have been revenge, could have been a jealous lover. It also could have been over corruption, and that's very likely because within the month before Michael Francke was killed, he talked to his brother Kevin and said he had uncovered some organized criminal element within the corrections department. A month later, he's dead. The weekend before that, he's living with a shotgun and a loaded .45. His recliner is in the living room. His wife, Binkta, said she thought that was odd, but he'd moved it in there, she thought, so he could see who was coming down the front steps, and there was a box of shotgun shells by the recliner. So you've got to look at that one, too. I'm not ruling anything out, but I think the state has been. That's been my impression.
Phil, and with that, you've moved us to what I think is probably the key and the most important element of public interest in this matter, the possibility that that is the reason. And we'll be talking about that in Town Hall after this break. We'll be right back after this. The word was corruption. And that's what we're going to pursue now. But let me say this first for the viewers out there. We're going to put up some phone numbers for you. We've got the phones open because we are live right now, Sunday night on this. And if you want to call in with some questions for the people here, or maybe with some answers, then you go right ahead and call. Here are the numbers. In Portland is 231-4252. Elsewhere in Oregon, 1-800-452-2487. In Washington, 1-800-547-8450. Back again, the word is corruption, and there are suspicion of connections here. Who wants to pick that up and talk about that?
You could have a stampede on
He said, yeah, I just heard from Kevin that I could have a stampede. But let's start it because I'm going to go back to you, Jim Redden, because you recently had an article on that, and you had some strong language in there. You said that there is ample evidence of corruption in the reform system from at least '86. You want to follow up on that, Jim?
There was a major investigation conducted by the Oregon State Police into the state prison in 1986. It resulted in the prosecution of 4 or 5 employees. I don't remember the exact number. Several others resigned their positions. The reports, the Oregon State Police reports, are now a public record. I've looked at them, as have other reporters, and I did a story which basically said that the extent of wrongdoing and corruption alleged within the system was much greater than the number of people who were punished for it. And it just seemed to me in my reading of the reports that there were so many loose ends, so many accusations that were not tracked down, and so much testimony from both employees and inmates about criminal activity within the center that it just, I don't see how any reasonable person reading those reports could conclude that they got it all out.
And more, someone else was into this same type of inquiry. Kevin, do you want to tell us about the conversation with Mike?
Well, the conversation has been widely reported.
But let's go through. When did it take place?
Between Thanksgiving and Christmas time. Don't know the exact date. I know it was
So
after
this would be
Thanksgiving.
just a matter of
before
weeks
Christmas.
before
Right.
your brother was killed.
Right.
Okay. And what was the conversation?
The conversation, as I've said before, we never talked a lot about business. It was always, how are you, how's the family, how's this, but spent very little time on that. He was having problems at that point in time that he had told me, personnel type problems. Couldn't figure out how to move people out that were in positions that he needed to get filled with people he could trust.
Trust.
Trust. Surround himself with people he could trust, the words
Did he say to
used.
you, I've got people in here I can't trust? Did he say that?
No, he said he had to surround himself with people that he could trust.
So it's a pretty clear implication.
To me it is.
Yeah, I think so. Go ahead.
The situation that he described was that he was going to be doing a total house cleaning right after the first of the year. He had talked about a criminal element, organized criminal element. And I said, organized crime, are you talking about the mafia? And he said, no. I said, organized criminal element. I didn't think anything of it at that point in time. We just went on. That was it.
He said he was going to have to do something about it.
He said he was having trouble with it, moving the people out. A lot of heads were going to roll.
Jim?
I'm sure that when he came into the Corrections Department, he was briefed on the 1986 investigation. It was a very, very big deal. And I'm sure that since that investigation, there had been other episodes of wrongdoing uncovered. I believe that 2 or 3 corrections employees resign every year because they're caught doing something. So from day one, or shortly thereafter, he had to be aware that there were some problems out there, and if he was any kind of good administrator, he had to have his eyes and ears opened trying to figure out what else there might possibly be.
Jim Redden, who's Larry Barnum?
Larry Barnum is a Portland police officer. He is on disability leave now. It's a physical disability. And in 1986, he was hired by one of the unions that represents corrections officers. When this investigation was going on, a number of lower-ranking employees were being accused of wrongdoing. The union wanted to make sure that the lower-level employees were not simply being made scapegoats in this affair. So they hired someone, in this case Larry Barnum, to try and oversee that investigation, to try and figure out if it was in fact being fairly run. What Barnum concluded, as far as I can tell, and I've had nothing but fairly brief conversations with him, What he concluded was that yes, indeed, some of these lower level employees were in fact guilty of what they were charged with, but he told me that he believed the corruption went much higher than that and went up into levels that were not being investigated, and that there was wrongdoing on the part of people who were not held accountable or even named in these reports.
Now I'll say to our audience, let's anyone else who wants to come in here now, we say, wait, this is Oregon. We just don't have that kind of thing in Oregon. Right there, do you want to talk?
Yeah, my name is Mike Shin. I'm an attorney in Portland, and I don't want to really respond to that question so much as to raise a question about what we're doing here and the nature of this gathering in some of Mr. Stanford's columns, which I've been reading this afternoon. They're very provocative, they're very exciting, they're entertaining. This program was introduced to, I think, in part as addressing a melodramatic case.
That's correct.
We are engaging here really in nothing but wild speculation. We're exchanging rumors. We've got a gathering of amateurs who are playing detectives. They're second-guessing the district attorney and everyone else in the state, and to the extent they're public officials, that's not necessarily out of bounds. What disturbs me, though, is when Mr. Stanford and others in some of his columns point the finger at specific people. They say, why did this man not take a lie detector test? If he did take the lie detector test and passed it, was he really telling truth? And if he didn't do it, who did? And I think we're doing a lot of damage to innocent people. Mr. Penn explains why he's not in this program. People were snickering after that. A lawyer in the state of Oregon, as well as most lawyers in the country, can be disbarred if they make public statements that might be construed to influence the verdict in a case. I think if Mr. Penn were here and he were to respond to the questions, and these are well-meaning people, and they have sincere questions, if he were to divulge the answers to those questions, he would jeopardize the investigation, the prosecution, and any verdict he might get, as well as his own standing as a lawyer.
So you're saying what's going on here, and I'm sure you're not alone in this, that people think, well, this is kind of a witch hunt that the media is conducting, and actually what they're probably doing is interfering with the investigation. Do you feel that?
Well, I'm not trying to impugn the motives of Mr.
No,
Stanford
no,
or
but
anyone else.
the
I'm just
result.
saying there is an element of that. The consequence of what is happening here is very, very dangerous.
Response. Who wants to respond to that? Right there, you, sir.
I think that
Would you identify yourself,
yes,
please?
I'm Reverend Robert Biggs, the chairman of the Oregon Volunteer Inmate Committee. I'm in and out of that penitentiary working with problems like of the men for many, many years. I wondered if the lawyer has been working with cases that are behind the walls and know really what some of the things that are happening. The first thing is that people of Oregon are outraged that this has gone on this long. This is why we're coming together now. I think what we're leading to is we're coming to the point where we can talk about some more specifics. The unfortunate thing about it is that people don't understand how that system has worked. There's the big inner family that is doing a part of the job, that's in correction, and there's the corrections family itself. This is a group that has manipulated and done things for years. And people can't talk about it. If they do talk about it, we know what's happened to the head of corrections, but those individuals that would like to come forward are afraid of their job. They're afraid of certainly of their life. The inmates, there's very many key inmates that aren't in for the kind of thing that we consider, not that the crime is good, but I mean some of the things they're in there for are rather decent kind of men, and will come out and do a good job in society. They want to talk, but
What do you
they
say
cannot
about the
talk.
point he makes, though, that what we have here, as he said, and I'll put this all over, that we have here, he said, amateurs moving into police work. Is that good? Is that good? Right there, back to you, Officer Henry, former Officer Henry.
The amateurish aspect of this, I was going to attempt to be the devil's advocate for the state, but it looks like it's a little difficult because the state has taken 9 months to come up with absolutely nothing to tell the public about this crime. And as the gentleman back here stated that, it could be a crime of passion, a jealous lover. If that was the case, it would have taken approximately 72 hours to solve the crime if somebody would have went home and slept 48 of it, because the man couldn't had too big an entourage of ladies out there, whatever, yes or no. But that aspect of it, that could have been completely done away with months ago. As far as the corruption angle goes, I was in corrections in Idaho when there was a lot of corruption. The correctional departments run the states, and it's been notorious in the United States from our history that corrections has been full of corruption and a laundering department for politicians. I'm reasonably sure that we haven't got rid of all of it. And as far as the inmate population and the drug money and then that aspect of it, as for a criminal syndicism going on in corrections, that's a foregone conclusion too. When I was in corrections, there was a lot of dope in the institution, but it was relatively small. Now it's a multi-million-dollar a year business. And if someone was going to stop this, which is exceedingly difficult, they would not take 1 minute to
We have a
put it out.
caller. Let's see one of a call. Would you want to put the call through, please? Need it on full back? Well, we've got lots right there. You, sir. Go ahead.
I almost hate to say this, but I'm Steve
Identify
Jackson.
yourself, please.
Steve Jackson with the Statesman Journal newspaper. I, in part, at least, agree with Mr. Shim over here. I hate to say that because I'm probably one of the amateurs he's referring to. But part of my problem in this whole thing, especially as it's been developing, is trying to separate what happened to Michael Francke from what's going on in the Department of Corrections. What's going on in the Department of Corrections may or may not have been going on the same time when Michael Francke is there.
There's not necessarily a connection, is what you're saying.
Right. And,
okay, go ahead.
And this group, I find us, my colleagues, and myself, and the family in some cases, as we've latched onto something as hard over here as Dale Penn had latched onto something over here, which is the car prowler. And in some ways, I think we're looking for, if there's a connection at Department of Corrections, every single time we connect it to Michael Francke, sometimes there's a little bit of difference. I think to rule something out that it couldn't have been the jealous husband, that it couldn't have been the car prowler, that it couldn't have been a single guy with something wrong is wrong. It's wrong of us, and it's wrong of the way we've been covering it in some ways.
Right there, you, sir.
Well, I'm not here to talk about who may have killed him because I have no theory or no speculation.
Identify yourself, please.
Yes, my name's Alan James, and I'm on the advisory board of Clackamas County Corrections. And it's through that I met Michael, and I think he was a fine gentleman. I really enjoyed him. And I feel the state is negligent in not putting up a reward of sizable amount for the capture of his murderer. I see no difference between him and any other policeman or someone in a similar position. And I have written to Gilmore, who I understand is the head of the Ways and Means Committee, and I've telephoned his office several times, and then I caused about 35 or 40 of my friends to write him. None of us were answered except one woman who I know in our church, and she called him and got him on the phone, and he said he was philosophically opposed to a reward of that type. I think that, and I've been
I think from what Phil's experience, a lot of people were philosophically opposed to contributing to the reward. Isn't that correct, Phil?
Some of the legislators, some of the same people who set it up failed to contribute, but that's some time in the past, yes. I think that there's about $23,000 in the reward fund now.
Ideas of what to do. We'll be talking about more ideas of what to do when we come back right after this. Okay, what to do to answer the questions. But first, I'm going to come back to you, Phil Stanford, because remarks have been made about the media and the impact of media coverage here. Good or bad? What do you think?
Well, I think what some people may not understand, and I think it's more common than not, is that the job of the press is to raise questions about public events, to raise questions and get people thinking about it. And sometimes it's painful. It's painful for public officials who might like to have their jobs made easier. It's even painful for citizens sometimes. Here in Oregon, one of the things that sort of comes out is that we don't want to believe that something like this could happen here. And so, for all sorts of reasons, people resist this. Governor Goldschmidt early on said that things that were being written in the Oregonian were BS and garbage. He's backed down on that. He tried to say that there wasn't a problem with drugs in the penitentiary. Well, there obviously is a problem, and he and Fred Pierce have both agreed that there is a problem, a serious problem, but it's under control. Okay, so we keep raising questions about this. We raise questions about the investigation. Of course we do, because there are things about the investigation, about the case itself, that don't make sense. I don't think there are any excuse or apology needs to be made for what the press has done on this. I think it's been very beneficial, and I think without it, people of the state wouldn't have any idea right now what's going on. If it were left to the people in Salem, the district attorney's office, this thing would have been forgotten several months ago.
Mike Shin, you want to respond to that?
Yes, I would. I don't have any quarrel with Mr. Stanford's questions. He raises some excellent questions, and they're very articulate. What disturbs me is the invasion of privacy of specific individuals. It's one thing to raise questions about the general state of the correction system down in Salem and the drugs.
Privacy of what individuals you're talking about?
Well, I don't want to name him
you
here.
can characterize
I'll be compounding the same problem, but he specifically has written about people who were asked to take lie detector tests and didn't want to take the lie detector test. There's no court of law in this country that would admit evidence of a lie detector test. That's how unreliable it is, and he has a constitutional right not to take it. And yet Mr. Stanford picks on this person for not taking it and then raises a series of speculations about why maybe he isn't doing this. This is the very kind of thing that can permanently damage the reputation of that individual as well as a number of others. So that's where I think the press is going too far. And as far as the prosecutor is concerned, people overlook the fact, and this is something I understand everyone's furor over crime in this state. I share that. But the prosecutor has two duties. One is to prosecute the guilty, and the other is to protect the innocent, all of the innocent people. And that's why Mr. Penn, I think, is more responsible than the press is by refusing to participate in programs like this and sharing what his investigation is, because he knows it would damage a lot of innocent people.
Pat Francke's ready to comment, but first now they tell me we do have someone on the phone. Hello, you're on Town Hall. What, your comment or your question, please?
Question. I'd like to direct this at Phil Stanford or Michael Francke's brothers. Do they think that it's a possibility that someone inside the State Corrections Department could have killed him because of what he uncovered?
Well, I think that's what you've been saying. We'll put that back to you, Pat. Go right ahead.
I think it's a lot higher probability than a car prowler or a random killing. We get phone calls, and it's almost daily now, with the increased attention, with the establishment of the grand jury, the special investigator. There's been more in the media about it, and the people who are afraid to talk before now are loosening up and calling us, and we say, would you be willing now to talk to the grand jury? Would you talk to Judge Warden? And they are telling us yes, but we got to be protected. We don't want, I'm so many years and months away from retirement, out of the system, and I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to lose my pension.
Is there anyone here who's a skeptic on the theory, perhaps, that there's a possible hitman that's connected to corruption? Is there anyone who's skeptical of that? Are you right there, Dinners, yourself?
I'm Joan Sinarski with Parents of Murdered Children. I'm not truly skeptical on that, but I think we have to be aware on both sides that we don't wear blinders. My daughter was murdered in 1981. She was 24. In this case, the police were the ones with the blinders on. It was in another state. They made up their minds that her husband did it. That's the way they pursued the whole case. They took it to trial. He was acquitted with a directed verdict of acquittal, and as a result, I'm sure they'll never be able to convict anyone if they find anyone. And this is, I think, is where Mr. Penn is coming from, and I also go along with what the attorney and Phil have said here. I think the questions need to be raised, but one other thing as far as lie detector tests, a certain percentage are inconclusive. That don't tell you anything, so it's not really going to answer questions.
That's correct,
for
but it
people.
is used as an investigative tool, I believe. That would be the point they would make. Another phone call. Hello there, you're on Town Hall. What's your question or comment?
Hello. First, I'd like to praise Phil Stanford for his use of journalism as a tool to force the pursuit of justice, and I don't think he's hurt anybody who hasn't opened himself up for a little bit of doubt in the first place. And my question is for anyone who would like to field it. From what I've seen so far, the investigation has been pretty minimal. Is it possible that the corruption is so high and so tightly knit that the people who have all the answers are basically putting a deadlock on it, and it's all hush-hush at this point?
Jim Redden, you want to take that? You've got your hand up.
No, I don't believe that's the case. One of the unfortunate things about this situation, Dale Penn is in a very awkward situation. He cannot come out and tell us what the investigation is doing correctly. I know in my reporting that there have been investigators in New Mexico talking to employees and inmates there. There have been investigators all over the state talking to people. I believe that they have, honest to God, interviewed a great many people. They have probably uncovered all sorts of information that we've not heard about. They've probably been able to completely put the lid on false leads. The trouble is, because they're not talking to us and they won't tell us what's going on, we have no way of knowing that. And then when we find something that looks like it's been overlooked, such as a knife found and an obvious escape route that the police didn't find, when we see that, it's easy for us to say, well, they're not doing a good job. We don't know, but I'm not willing to say they're doing a bad job.
Now, back to the brothers on that, because isn't it, in fact, I know you've asked, of course, you're in court to try and get the autopsy. Why do you want the autopsy?
Settle in our own minds just exactly what happened to Mike.
But isn't there a point to this that the investigators, one of the things they're trying to do is keep their cards closed so that they can dispel false confessions? Something like this, like you recall years ago in Los Angeles, the Black Dahlia murder, 42 confessions. They've had even things that sound like false confessions here. Isn't that a common investigative technique?
That we're going to release the report to the public. That's the direct implication of what you're saying to me. And I have told Dale Penn, my mother has promised him, that nobody outside of our immediate family who has the legal right under the laws of Oregon is going to look at that report. It's just that simple.
Mike, you want to respond to that? What do you say to that?
Well, I'm put in a difficult position to be commenting on what the Francke brothers would do. I don't know them, and I'm not going to get into that, except to speak to the general duty of a prosecutor, which is, in fact, to keep privileged the information that is critical to the investigation. And it is true that you can talk to any psychiatrist that's done forensic work, as well as prosecutors around this country, and they will tell you that the case you mentioned is not that uncommon. It is astounding for most people to realize this, but when a highly celebrated case becomes a headline story, there is a line outside the prosecutor's door of people coming in to confess. One of the things, I don't know what's in this autopsy, I haven't the vaguest idea, but there may well be evidence in that autopsy that would allow the prosecutor to screen out who the killer was as opposed to these other people because of the nature of the killing. There are such things as signature killings, and they can tell a lot of things from the autopsy that might enable them to do that.
Let me put it, because time is running down, to our people here, particularly the people who have been critical. What isn't being done that should be done, in your view? And I'll put that to the brothers. Pat, if you want to pick on that.
The biggest thing that needs to be done now is to give Judge Ward the subpoena power that he needs to...
Now, Judge Warden has been appointed by the governor as a special investigator here, correct? Okay, go ahead.
Give him the subpoena power and the muscle that he needs to conduct an active investigation into corrections and run that on its course, and let the state police continue to investigate Mike's murder in their own fashion. And if the two roads converge, all well and good. We've said before, if they can prove to us that it was a random act of violence, or it was some jealous husband, or give us a good scenario, tell us what happened, and we'll buy that. But don't just keep going back to, he holds on to random act of violence and car prowler as hard as we're saying, look over here.
Now, there's one thing that can be done here, too, and that is all of us can take part in this. And Dale Penn has some suggestions as to how we, as citizens, can help in this investigation. Can we roll that tape, please?
We need information from the public. There are various ways the public can provide information. There is a reward of exceeding $22,000 that I know the trustees would be happy to pay for information that would identify and lead to a successful prosecution for the person who murdered Michael Francke. And so people can call in to the state police information number. There is also a 1-800 number for the state police information, and both of those numbers would be helpful. Judge Warden is doing an independent investigation concerning corruption in the Corrections Division. He has a number and also an address that people can call or write to provide information to him or to provide information for the Francke case through him. Certainly they can contact my office and call my office with that information. And in addition, if people would like to write to the grand jury themselves, they can do that. And we have an address where they can write a sealed letter, and the grand jury would receive that and get that information and have the ability to contact that person.
Kevin Francke, time is just about out, and I'm going to turn to you and ask you if you want to conclude what you'd like to say to our viewers, the people of the Northwest, at this point.
I guess the bottom line is thank you, first of all. Thank you to the people that have contributed to the reward fund. Thank you to the press, the media, the silent majority out there, the silent minority out there. Thanks Steve Krasik, the Bills, the Erics, the Steves, the Jims. it would have been impossible for us as the family to deal with it successfully without their help. And it's been much appreciated.
Well, there's not much time else to say, but I hope that there'll be some answers. I'm expecting that we'll be hearing some answers pretty soon out there to the questions we posed tonight. Who killed Michael Francke? And more important, why? Because that's the question that is of more of interest to all of us. Thank you for tuning into Town Hall, and good night.